everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Hi Vishal, hi Sonali, hi Prasad. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. As you all would know, this is our Coacharya Trainer Showcase webinar, where the experts in the webinar today will be showcasing some techniques that they have mastered over the years, and you would get an opportunity to see coaching in action beyond just what it is in theory. So we will just get started in a couple of minutes. I wanted to announce a few things before we start with the discussion in the webinar today. But as you all are joining in, do tell us where you're joining us from. Please type it in the chat box. And during this webinar, you can post your questions on the chat box if you have any. You can also share your thoughts, anything that is coming up for you during the webinar in the chat box. We welcome all of you to, please feel free to use the chat box during the webinar. Now, as some of you would know, that we have a coaching supervision program that is coming up on the 31st of March. This will be led by Coacharya co-founder Ramanarayan. The coaching supervision program is a once-in-a-year program that Coacharya does. It doesn't happen very often. So this is a rare opportunity for people who want to become coaching supervisors and coach the coach, so to speak. So this is one. I will be shortly posting all the links in the chat box where you can read more about the coaching supervision program. Also, why is supervision important? Why you should enroll in this program. The other program that we have coming up is with Cindy and Tracy. Tracy is also there with us in the webinar today. This program is a level 2 program, which focuses on somatic coaching and personal mastery. So we have a blog written by Tracy, actually, which I will be posting the link for shortly in the chat box. If anybody of you wants to know what somatic coaching really is and how it is more deeper, more profound than just cognitive coaching, you should check out that blog for sure. With that, I will pass it on to Tracy, Priya, and Madhulika. Over to you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Lovely to be here and to be spending some time with you. And before, are you, I'm just seeing something about volume. Are you all able to hear me? Okay, good. Good thing we're talking about mindfulness and beyond today. And yes, so that's our topic. What we're going to be talking about today, what we're focusing on is the practice of being present and being aware in the moment, which means it can mean many things, but essentially observing not just what's happening around us, but observing the way that we're taking in what's happening around us by noticing our thoughts, noticing the sensations in our body, noticing the emotions that that triggers. And by being able to do that, helping us to not have reactions that just pop out of, by default, the patterns that we have, or not get caught up in the judgment that sometimes gets triggered, or not get lost in the past or in the future. So this is an important practice, of course. We talk a lot about maintains presence in coaching. We talk a lot about evokes awareness in coaching. And we also talk about the fact that as coaches, we need to mentally and emotionally prepare for sessions. And today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be exploring why this practice needs to happen, not just before we enter a coaching conversation, not just, that we're taking 10 minutes to settle ourselves before we get on Zoom with the client. And ideally that's happening, but why that needs to happen every day, as a regular practice for us as coaches, and how having that regular practice will help shape the way that we show up as coaches. So before we dive in, I'm actually just going to pop a question in the chat and love to hear from all of you. What do you do to cultivate presence in your day-to-day life? And as you are considering that and typing out your answers, I'll ask the panelists to each introduce themselves and also share that just in a sentence or two, what presence means for you. And Priya, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening from wherever you're logging in. I am delighted to be here yet again, and this time with Tracy and Madhulika. I'm Priya Ramanarayan. I'm a life and a leadership executive coach, a mentor coach, and I'm also privileged to be a trainer and educator at Coacharya, where I started my coaching journey. So presence for me is all about equanimity. I was just telling Tracy the other day when we were talking about the webinar. The one word that comes to my mind is being equipoised. No, it's all about being in control with your emotions, being present for your client, and you're observing and sensing what's happening in the client's body, what's happening in the client's tonality. And it's all about letting go, and you let come the future emerging potential for the client. And it's classic theory but it's all about having control about the voices, the inner voices in your mind, and yet be completely present for your client. Madhulika?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Tracy. Thank you, Priya. Hello, everyone. I am Madhulika. I'm joining you from Bangalore. I belong to a small city, Varanasi, in India, but I've lived in Bombay and now presently in Bangalore. I have also been a Coacharya learner through and through. So I'm currently PCC and a team coach, ACTC, all through with Coacharya. And I work in the space of team coaching and also as a relationship coach specifically and parenting coach. These are the areas I'm most familiar and comfortable working with. So that's where I choose to be. And I'm also a mentor coach. I'm mentoring for a lot of Coacharya learners at their L1 and L2 level of learning. And happy to be here with everyone. This is an interesting subject, very close to me. So thank you, Tracy, for inviting me here with Priya. And yeah, for me, presence, the way I see it is being available to myself and to another, whoever I'm sharing the space and time with. I simply put it, just being there and being available to them through all my senses. Yeah, I'll stop at that and we'll discuss more.
Thank you. And I'll introduce myself shortly. I realize I didn't really do that. I just want to pick out a few things that came up in the chat. So I've been loving reading this, and there's meditation, yoga, observing breath, following random thoughts, centering oneself, connecting with the breath, connecting with self, practicing mindfulness. So there's a lot of people that are practicing this in their day-to-day life, which isn't surprising considering that you were drawn to coaching. And for myself, I'm Tracy. I am a life and personal leadership coach. I am also a meditation and mindfulness teacher. And in my practice, I really focus on somatics in particular, and building emotional resilience through that. And yeah, I'm also, or sorry, I'll just also quickly say I'm a facilitator with Coacharya. As you heard, there's a program coming up, but also I do some mentoring, working with level 1 and level 2 coaches at Coacharya as well. So what presence means for me in day-to-day life, the answer that's coming up for me right this moment as I'm speaking it, because this is something that I've really been aware of needing to practice more, is just being aware that I'm not perfect. Presence is not perfection. And so as I'm going through my moments, it's recognizing when I'm either expecting myself to have done something differently or expecting the moment to unfold in a different way, trying to predict the future, ruminating about the past, and recognizing that those things are going to happen and they're part of a survival response. And I don't need to get in my head about those because that also is not present. I just come back to the moment. I try to notice, like, where are my feet? Where's my breath? Maybe I hear like something in my environment, a bird or something like that. And just come back to like the exact moment that I'm in right now. And I guess if I were to summarize that in one brief sentence, it would be that presence is a practice and it's a continual practice for me. Yeah. And one of the things that happens, as I become more and more present to the moment, this is happening right now as there's some background noise over here, is that I become more and more aware of my emotions. I don't know if you find that, other panelists. And so I'd love to hear from you in as part of this discussion and from the audience as well. And I'll post this in the chat. How do you currently relate to your emotions? What kind of relationship actually do you have with your emotions?
So, can I share, Tracy?
Yes.
So with my medical training and being a researcher, I think I have very diagnostic or, I am quick to diagnose or get into investigation. So quickly, I think my emotions are informing me. So I get in a quick check, okay, let's see what's happening. And so my emotions usually inform me what's happening for me.
So I think for me, emotions is a lot of awareness, what's really happening inside my body. How am I reacting to situations? How am I reacting to people? How am I reacting to events? So it's all about being aware, and they always allow me to actually express. The moment you express, they say, you're actually tackling the emotion. So I always believe in expressing and labeling that emotion. So you actually become friends with it. And it's okay. There is no negative, there is no positive emotion, but we just group a category to negative and positive for ease of understanding because it kind of varies the energy. So it's all about, I think, acceptance and then making friends with emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to be really honest, that's something that I've really had to work on moving into, because there was the longest time that I wouldn't have called my emotions friends. Maybe the ones that I liked, maybe the, joy and laughter and happiness and all of those things, cheerfulness. But those more, like, as you said, negative emotions were ones that I really tended to bottle up, and I would just keep myself busy to not have to deal with them. And it was really through coaching and through meditation that I renegotiated my relationship with my emotions, and we're becoming friends. There's some days that I'm like, okay, like, please leave me alone. And the funny thing is that the more that I try to shut them out, the louder that they get. They really are there. Like, as Madhulika said, they're communicating something to us, right? They're giving us a message. And so I try to recognize that and then investigate, like, what's my body trying to tell me right now? And why is it important? So we're having this conversation, we're talking about our presence, we're talking about becoming aware of our own emotions, and we're talking about doing that in a day-to-day life. Why is that important for us to do as coaches?
Madhulika, you okay if I go? So just to give a background, we know what emotions are, what is presence are, and presence is also very difficult to explain, but they actually do a lot of wonders in a coaching conversation, and that even we as coaches cannot recognize, right? So emotions really help us to be genuinely present in the coaching conversation. While your presence is actually getting altering, I strongly believe when you're generally present and you have the right intention, it can do wonders. You can actually see what is the potential of your client, what is emerging in the entire coaching conversations. And it really matters because when you're really aware of emotions, it gives you a sense, there's a shift in your sense of tone, there's a shift in a sense of your behavior, and that encourages the client to actually share more openly with complete vulnerability, right? And then with emotions, you also become aware of your habitual patterns. You also become aware of your behavior, and you get into discovering some deep intentions, and that makes you grounded and humble. And I think emotions are very, very important because once you start communicating with them, you bring a lot of warmth, you bring a lot of affection because you're seeing your journey as a whole instead of just a series of daily situations and daily activities. So trying to get to know about our emotions, we are actually doing a lot of work on ourselves. So we tend to drop the baggage that we are all carrying as human beings. We tend to drop everything that is not essential. We're letting go. When we are aware of emotions, we also start learning the art of letting go. You're letting go your old patterns, you're letting go of your biases, your assumptions, and you're even letting go of your own ego self. And that's the beauty of emotions, because as you're analyzing them, you tend to let go of your ego self, and that is how you connect to your internal voice, your inner being, your inner knowing. And that's a very, very beautiful space of letting go and just surrendering. Just surrender to the process and just surrender to the entire universe. That's my strong belief.
So yeah, so picking up a few things that Priya, a couple of things resonated. And it's an important question you, Tracy, you brought in here. Why is it important as coaches to be present and to be aware of these emotions? I think the moment we are, like Priya earlier mentioned about labeling, I look at it like, okay, finding them out, investigating. The moment I catch them and label them, I sort of have control on them. So I have tackled them. And why it is important for me, I believe that when I go in a session with a client, I'm able to take myself out. I'm able to take my biases, my whatever I'm dealing with. If I am aware of my emotions, I'm able to settle it, catch it, settle it, keep that out of the session so that the space is clear for my client. So I'm fully available to the client. And I believe this, coaching conversation is a space and time given to a client. So it's only fair to, keep ourselves out of it. And for us to remain out, I think it's important to know ourselves and hold ourselves out. So yeah, I mean, I think emotion, catching them, being aware of them, labeling them, and knowing that this is what I am feeling, and I can do something to settle it so that I stay out and my client gets the space and time. Clear space.
I love that. Clear space, right? So we can have a space, it could be cluttered and it can be clear, right? And we get a sense of that as soon as we enter space, like what does the energy of that space feel like? Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy. I want to pick up a few of the things that that came through in the chat. So emotion serving as an internal and external compass. Absolutely, right? Like if we don't have that internal compass, it's going to be really hard for us to be able to navigate outside of us. That has to start from within. And somebody here is talking about sitting with them, talk to them. I've done that work as well. It can be really powerful. Where they're arising, what are the needs, emotions as feedback, roller coaster ride, definitely can resonate with that. Mixed state, and completely feel them, facing the emotions. I'm giving you a day, no more intention. I'm moving on. I love that, Cindy. I was telling that to a friend the other day. I was just in such a dark mood, and I just said to my friend, I sometimes just give my mood its own autonomy, and it's like, if it needs to be dark, it's going to be dark. But I know that, I kind of negotiate that the next day is a new day, and then I'll wake up in a different space, and that really does help. So yeah, if we don't cleanse us, if we don't allow ourselves to feel everything, I'm just reading off of this chat, it can come into the session with a client, right? We need to be able to do the work ourselves. We know that it's part of coaching mindset that we need to be able to manage our own emotions, and we also know that it's another competency about being confident in the space of client emotions. I know I'm not saying that verbatim. So if we haven't done the work ourselves, it's going to be very hard when we're in the session and all of a sudden something comes up within us really strongly. And that can happen because maybe something the client said, and it can also happen because we have mirror neurons. And if a client is feeling something really intensely, we're going to feel that in our own bodies as well. And if we're not aware of that, if we haven't done the work beforehand, then it's going to be hard not to be overwhelmed by that in the midst of a coaching session. And yet, as I, said earlier, one of the things that really is coming up for me is that presence is not perfection. And none of us, I mean, actually, if anyone here is perfect, I'd love to hear. Maybe you can come up and run the run the webinar. But then in that case, it might not be that relatable for the rest of us that aren't, right? And so because presence isn't perfection, I just want to invite you all to consider and ask the panelists as well, like when you lose presence, and whether that's in your day-to-day life or it's in a coaching conversation, what do you do to come back to yourself? Do you want to go ahead and share?
Yeah. Yeah, like you mentioned, Tracy, I think when we lose our presence, there are a lot of mindfulness activities that we can do. But it's a long journey, you know. It's not about in the coaching conversation, when you lose presence, what do you do? We need to, like you mentioned, we need to do a lot of work on ourselves. And this is a daily ritual that we need to do to get to that presence with the client in a coaching conversation. So my go-to is an everyday mindful activity, a short meditation, and hardly takes about 10-15 minutes in the morning. And I prefer to do it in the early hours of the morning. In Sanskrit, we call it the Brahma Muhurt, where it's like 3:30 to 6:30. I follow something called white light meditation. It's about a mindful scanning of your entire body to just relax the tensed muscles. And then my spiritual guide and mentor always asks us, in our classes, have you filed your FIR? So in this meditation, what I also do is I listen to my emotions, then I introspect using this tool, and then I apply what my inner conscious is telling me as an answer. And just to bring that curiosity on the introspection bit, when my guide says, have you filed your FIR? It has nothing to do with any complaint. FIR stands for frequency, intensity, and recovery. So whenever I get triggered, let's say anger is an emotion that is coming, and I'm continuously observing that I need to work on my anger more frequently. It's all about in my meditative space, once I've scanned my entire body and in a calm breathing space, I ask myself the frequency. How frequently am I getting angered? How frequently am I getting angry for events? And what is the frequency of occurrences? Then I question myself, what was the intensity of the anger? It's about, it's the pendulum. Are you going to the extremes? Are you hitting the roof? And every day in my practice earlier, if the anger used to hit the ceiling, it actually comes down. The intensity of the anger starts coming down eventually when you start these rituals and practices. And most important is the recovery. How soon are you recovering from this anger? Like Cindy mentioned, I'm giving you a day and then I'm moving on. So asking myself, how soon are you recovering from that emotion, whether it's a triggered negative emotion or not so good emotion? I ask myself, and I have to say, while my anger used to last about 2 days, now I can just snap out of it in 5 minutes. And this is a long journey. This is a journey of 5-7 years, but I am seeing the difference. So that is a daily ritual that you do to start working on yourself. But if there's something happening inside a coaching conversation, it's all about bringing some self-awareness activities, mindfulness activities. Now, mindfulness is about awareness on your mind and body. But I love this term that is coined by Ram, which is mindlessness. Mindlessness is a state where the awareness on mind and body is transcending to energy state. And that energy state gives me that complete confidence that I'm part of the universal consciousness. I'm just energy. And it helps me answers my question, who's my real self? What is my real work? So it's very simple. My real self is I'm energy and I'm part of the universal consciousness. We are all energy, and my real work is to be serving the client. Serving the client, and don't worry about the outcome. Don't attach yourself to the outcome as long as you're giving your 100%. So that helps me stay in the moment. Just do your duty, give your 100%, and you always consider yourself as a service to the client. I think that truly helps me staying in the moment.
Yeah, so like Priya also mentioned, I have been a frequent meditator with Vipassana. So what has happened over a period of time, like Priya mentioned a couple of times, that it has taken time to be here, time of practice and working this over and over again. So through Vipassana, what has happened for me is that body starts informing me. So if there is an emotion, I get to observe my breath. So I notice my, heart is racing, or the change in the, so my body gives me a signal, which puts me into an investigative sort of mode as to what is happening. Why is my heart racing? What is happening? Is my breath, it's slowing down, it's going fast. So then I ask myself this question, so what's happening? So it's sort of self-coaching. And again, these tools within coaching, we worked on ourselves. It's taken time to be able to self-coach myself in that moment. And then, like the body informs, I ask the question like an investigator. So let me see what's happening. What is it telling me? And Tracy, like you mentioned, and Priya also mentioned, I give myself also time. Okay, so if this is what I found is the emotion occurring in me right now, I have to acknowledge it. So I have to label it. I have to acknowledge it. I cannot brush it aside. I cannot hid it under the carpet. So I have to acknowledge it. And when I acknowledge it, I claim my space and I give it some time. So like you take 5 minutes, you take 2 hours. So with approximately 10-year-long practice with sort of Vipassana meditation, it has enabled that any sort of emotion, negativity, not just during or before coaching session, but any stressful situation, I've been able to snap out within, depends on the intensity of the event. I've been able to come back home to myself within 5 to 2 hours. So biggest in 2 hours, smallest in 5 minutes. But that has taken 10 years of time of constantly being aware, catching it, investigating it, self-coaching, sort of, and coming back home to myself through simple, small, what's my, there's another self-talk that I do in my head when I've caught my emotion. So I say, I'm here now. When I say I'm here now, I'm engaging all my senses. So I engage my eye with what do I see around myself? What do I hear? The nearest sound. Most often it is my heartbeat, but sometimes it is also like Tracy, you mentioned some bird or rustling of the leaves. So small things. So like when I realize that I'm here now, I am actively engaging my senses in my immediate surrounding. And that helps me calm down my breath, my heartbeat, come back home to myself. And then when I've done feeling, thinking, investigating, then I get into some action, which is making a simple cup of tea for myself, walking on the grass, taking the dog for a walk, just small actions.
Beautiful.
That's
Thank you. What was coming up for me as you were sharing that? I was saying presence isn't perfection, presence is practice, and also presence is patience, right? Like this isn't going to happen overnight. You've had this practice for 10 years, Priya. You've had this practice for a number of years. I know for myself, I sometimes think like, okay, when's it going to stop? It never stops. It's a lifelong practice, and we have to be patient with ourselves and recognize that we're humans. And yeah, I mean, I think that for myself, what helps me come home to myself is to acknowledge what's happening. If I'm shutting out parts of myself, if I'm feeling shame about them, if I'm telling myself stories about them, if I'm, and this is sometimes what I tend to do when something unpleasant is arising. I just try to focus on work, or I try to focus on the next thing. And that's not coming home to myself. That's not being very friendly with what my body's trying to tell me. And so having also a daily practice in my meditation practice, I do a body scan. I also do a lot of heart opening, and that also helps me come back to myself, because I'm able to like reach into my heart and access a space of love, even for the difficult, so-called difficult parts of me, or the difficult experiences that I'm having in that moment. And I'm just going to take a look at the chat here. So yeah, practicing returning to awareness in Tai Chi. I've been really interested in actually learning more about Tai Chi. That's on the bucket list for sure. Accepting the emotion, understanding it's okay. Yes, what does one do when this happens during a session? Excellent question. And I'm going to come to that in a minute. RAIN. So yeah, Tara Brach has this practice called RAIN, which is recognizing, allowing, investigating, and nurturing. And it's very similar. I think all of these practices have different titles, but they have a lot of similarity, right? And the first step is actually recognizing that it's there. And notice how like love is in all of it, right? Like it's all about nurture, it's all about acceptance, it's all about love. In a coaching session, when I notice myself losing presence for whatever reason. And I love that I heard recently that Cindy coined, said Ram coined the term mind free as well. So like if there's mindlessness, there's not mind free. And I really love that because I think of it as personal sovereignty. It's like these thoughts are going to come up, these feelings are going to come up. They're a part of us, right? But they don't need to rule us. So when we're free, we're able to recognize them, we're able to acknowledge them, but we're not under their rulership. We're actually able to come back to, like this beautifully said, Madhulika, like coming home to ourselves. We're able to come back home and knowing that ourselves includes all of those things, right? So we're not shutting any part of it out. So when it comes up for me in a coaching session, I try to just take, and this is where this daily practice is really helpful. I try to do the things that help me outside of coaching. So like I notice my feet on the ground. I reach into my like physical body, or like, yeah, I saw you do this, Priya, like, feel my fingertips or even like rub my fingertips together. Yes. Or, if I'm feeling like I really need to settle, like I'll take my hands and I'll hold them, I'll sort of press them down into my lap. So that's my way of sort of nurturing myself in a sense. I'll pick up, obviously I'm still listening to the client, I'm still aware of the client, but I'm also opening my ears up to what else. So maybe that's like a bird, or maybe that's even sometimes like an appliance humming, like just a little background noise to help sort of bring the awareness, open up the awareness so it's not so focused on on whatever it is that's happening that we're reacting to in that moment. So all of those things can be really helpful. And ultimately, my biggest practice is empathy, like is compassion, is love. And I would actually just say love. So I recognize that I'm here holding space for someone. And if I'm cluttering up that space, if I'm not there, right, then how are they being held? And so I have to really at that point connect from my heart to the person in front of me, and whether that's in coaching or it's someone else that I'm maybe having a little bit of a little bit of a interaction with, let's say, outside of the coaching space, but I have to just come back to love. Yeah.
May I add something there, Tracy?
Please.
Just to answer the question on what happens in a session. So everything that you said, and to add to that, I think one of the best ways that has worked for me is to concentrate on my breathing. No, it's there's a very, very beautiful exercise that you do in mindfulness, which is called dropping the anchor. If you go onto the YouTube, there are very different variants of it, but then this really does wonders in a coaching session. It's all about, you just scan your emotion, and then you have this hand gesture. When you've done in your daily practice, you anchor to a hand gesture like this mudra, where you put your thumb and the index together and you firmly press your feet on the ground, and you're actually connecting to your safe zone. And so you breathe in very calmly, and then just with the hand gesture, press your feet to the ground. Actually has done wonders, but then you need to have provided a lot of practice to it. But one of the most important things that we could do in a coaching session is to practice silence. So, there's this gap between the stimuli and the response, right? The wider the gap, the better your response. So just use that gap to fill it with silence. And it's good because in coaching, we have to introduce silences. It's only in these silences that the client is processing, but you're also getting time. The coach is also processing and trying to come to their equilibrium, that calm and composed state. So the silence is truly going to help there. And in the silence, let's start processing. Am I going into performance mode? Let me drop the performance mode and try to connect to my intention. My intention here is to serve the client. And why am I getting, jittered about it? What is altering my emotion and my presence there? So it's all about, the most important thing is trust in yourself. We need to trust ourselves. We need to trust that moment, and we need to trust the coaching process. The moment you trust, you automatically surrender to the entire event, the entire conversation, and surrendering is the key. The moment you surrender, your presence comes back to that equipoise state. That's definitely worked wonders for me.
The beautiful thing, Priya, you brought in, trust the process, and taking out, so that in fact with coaching that has happened, but in other situations, like for this webinar, I am not frequent on webinars or panelists. So I was noticing that everything that we're talking with respect to coaching here for learner coaches was happening with me, within me, to be present here in the webinar. So jitters, nervousness, all of that. So when you said, Priya, taking that performance out of, like, am I here to perform, or am I here to serve the need of the moment, serve the need of the client? So when I get present to that, I'm able to come back to myself. And Tracy, you mentioned beautifully, when you mentioned love and empathy, I think love and empathy applies to self and to the client in that moment. So all these practices of coming back home to ourselves within the session, I think acknowledges our love for ourselves, our humanness, and then connecting that with the client in the moment.
Absolutely. And I just had to put my words into practice just now, because before, when before we went live, I was saying, I haven't had internet issues for weeks now, and I'm really hoping that doesn't happen. My internet just went out. I'm on my mobile data. So as that happened, I felt this like drop in my stomach, this pit. It's still a little bit there, You can see my voice is just a little bit higher here. There's a little bit of tension here. But what came up for me is also like having a little bit of a sense of humor, right? Being able to laugh at myself and say, oh my God, like the worst thing that I thought might happen happened. And guess what? Like, it's not like the earth has opened up and I'm going to get sucked down into the fires of, who knows what is down there. It's okay. No one's dying here.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes just being able to have a little bit of a giggle with ourselves as well.
Absolutely. The universe is listening to you, Tracy.
Yes, we have to be very careful about what we put out there, what we manifest, which is, we could probably do a whole other webinar on worry, right? And how that helps create sometimes our reality.
Yeah.
And we've kind of really beautifully come into empathy, and we've come into love, and we could take this, I think, into a coaching session, right? We've talked all this time around like how we're managing ourselves, how we're using our presence, our awareness, our empathy to be able to hold space for the client. But we can also use those things to also help support the client to evoke some awareness, like to partner with them, because there's a lot that happens in a coaching session. There's a lot that might be said, but there's also a lot that might be unsaid, right? And we talk about that, the unsaid of the client. So how do you use empathy, presence, I'll even throw the word intuition in there, to explore what's unsaid in a coaching session?
Can I go, Madhulika? You have something to share? Yeah. Presence in coaching is definitely feeling the entire conversation. It's not about controlling the conversation as a coach. When we are new to coaching, we think coaching presence is all about being present, just being there for the client, but it's a lot more. There's a whole lot of art and science behind coaching presence. Now, the words that you use, like empathy, intuition, and being present to our emotions, they're all components of being present. If we need to capture the unsaid, capturing the unsaid can be done while bringing awareness to the shifts that the client is displaying. You could do somatic coaching, like you and Cindy will be taking a program very soon. You can use somatic coaching, or you can start bringing awareness and shifts in the client. The energy shifts are all about the inner work that is happening inside the client, the deep inner work that is processing inside the client as they're narrating the story. It's the energy shifts can come in different forms. It can just be simple and surface levels with your bodily movements, or it can also go on a deeper level with your linguistic shifts, where it's about what are the words the client is using, what is the narration, what is the story, what are the pauses, and what is the tonality. And it could also be at a much deeper level, rhythmic shifts. It's about how fast is the client speaking, how slow is the client speaking, what is happening, are we noticing the changes in the rhythm? Is the client breathing faster, harder, or the client breathing slower? So if we can put the shift for the client to bring awareness, all we need to do is focus on the sensing that is happening and reflect it back to the client. We don't need to interpret anything, just reflect the sensation that you are observing and reflect it back to the client. When you do this, it's very, very nice that you start noticing, you start realizing, is there congruence in what the client is sharing along with the energy shifts? Or is there something happening? Is there incongruence with what the client is sharing? So when you become aware of congruence and shifts in energy and put it back to the client, there's a lot of magic that happens. So when you're talking about empathy, intuition, in fact, I'd like to share an example or an experience, a very humble experience I had with one of my clients. It's a very highly accomplished leader, woman leader in an organization. She came to the coaching conversation to explore about a work-life balance and a very stressful position, because she was being offered to be on the board of the organization. And she was a little hesitant because her daughter was expecting a child and she wanted to be there for her. So as she was narrating the entire story, there were a lot of things that was coming, as a highly accomplished couple. They moved around in the world, across countries. They moved from the US, they moved to Europe, London, and then to India. But she also mentioned one of the things that when she moved to the US, she started a PhD, but because of challenging issues, she never pursued it. And because she got her dream job in London, she just moved there. But there was some moment when she mentioned that she had discontinued the PhD. There was a silence. There was a breathing that was heavy in her entire body energy. So when this was explored with permission, there were tears, and then she just broke down, and there was an emotional outburst, and there was sadness. But I think it was a very profound moment, because for her, a very natural statement of, I couldn't complete my PhD, but I got a dream job in London. Just that natural statement was as a matter of a fact statement, had so much of emotions pent up beneath the layer that just that sensing of breath brought all the emotions to the surface. Now, it was a profound moment for me, Tracy, because at some point in my life, I've also made compromises in career for the family. So it was important for me to be present to my emotions, let go of it, and bring empathy to listen with an open heart to my client, and then use the intuition to understand what is beneath the surface and what is it the client wants to kind of emerge as a future for herself. I think that was a very, very profound moment for me as a coach, about combining empathy, intuition, at the same time, managing my emotions, letting go, and just being present for the client, and get into that listening mode, generating listening that they say about the intuition and where the client wants to be. Today, she's actually moved back to the US and pursuing a PhD. So this question so perfectly fits the entire element that I thought this is the power of breath, energy shifts that does wonders for a client. Yeah.
Beautiful story you shared, Priya. Thank you for bringing that story to life and sharing it with us. How you were able to pick up the energy shifts. And Tracy, Priya, and everyone, like Priya has already shared. So similarly, so I have in 1400 hours of my work as an individual and group, which I have not found an emotion that client has, and I have not experienced it. So there has always, I found that whatever client is expressing or the emotion they have is something that at some point I have experienced myself, or I have seen others around me very close to me and experiencing them. So in the moment, I think over a period of time of practicing coaching, I am able to connect their expressed emotion with how, I, as a human being, have also experienced it. And then when I'm able to connect with that human element within them and within myself, I'm able to offer whatever is required at the moment. Sometimes it is just silence. Sometimes, it is just taking them through a little bit of centering. Sometimes, just noticing, like Priya mentioned about noticing the tonal shift in the voice, noticing how they've gone back in the seat. There is a limitation to virtual sessions, but still we notice how the client is, changing their body language, facial expression. So all of these things get picked up. So I think we are able to observe with practice and bring it back. Like Priya used the word, and I'm using it again, reflect what I'm observing about the client to them. And it's a point of privilege as a coach, because here you have somebody who's in the middle of the situation, their difficulty. They are not able to see a lot of things. So when we listen to them fully, being present there, being observant, empathizing with them, connecting with them, we are at an advantage point where we are able to see some dots which they are perhaps not able to see because they're too close and into the situation. When we listen to them fully, when we are present fully, we are able to see those dots. And we are able to, in fact, competency 7.5 allows us to share that, what we intuit, what we sense, what we observe, what are we picking up from the client's body language, said, unsaid, words, repetition of their words. So we are able to reflect it back in an unattached, non-judgmental way, just putting it on the table. And that is enough for them to sort of get present to it. So we enable through that competency 7.5 allows that for us to present it before the client so that they can take, they become present to it and they act from thereafter. So I think, like Priya said, I am saying pretty much the same thing, but utilizing all our senses of observation and intuition, connecting at an empathetic level with the client, all of this, and presenting it back to them for them to take action.
Yeah, and you talked about non-attachment, and that's also a practice of presence, right? Because if we offer it to the client and the client doesn't resonate with it, we have to let go. we have to move on. We have to kind of clear the
Absolutely.
slate, because that's the most important thing really about that competency, is that we're not attached to whatever it is that we've shared.
Placing it on the table and sort of just putting it on the table, and with all humility and care, and owning up the emotion. Like, this is what I am sensing. This is what I am observing. I could be totally off, and let them choose whether they relate, whether they dismiss, whether they do not, or something else comes up. And we have to take the lead from there.
Absolutely. And Priya, what you were talking about earlier, and Madhulika, you mentioned that as well. Like when the client does have an intense emotion, right? Like with the client being in tears, or Madhulika, you said like all of the emotions that they've experienced, you've experienced at one time. And so if we haven't done the work on ourselves, there might be some discomfort. Like I've been one of those coaches. I've seen some coaches that are really uncomfortable when there's tears. They feel like they need to like immediately cheer the client up. Or I used to shut down when other people would get angry, and sometimes the clients will get angry, hopefully not at us, but at whatever it is that they're processing at that moment. And we have to be able to relate to it, and to be able to also identify when it's ours to hold and when it isn't. So one of the things that I've found that I sense in a client is that sometimes I'll actually feel whatever the client, like all of a sudden my chest will get heavy. All of a sudden I'll start getting anxious. All of a sudden, something, and I'll check in with myself and say like, it doesn't really matter. Is it mine or is it not? But I don't need to be in it. And sometimes I'll use that as a guide to explore what's happening with the client. I might say like, again, always with permission, and just mention to the client, like, I noticed as you said that I felt some heaviness in my chest. And what were you experiencing as you shared that? And a lot of the times that'll be something that the client will have resonated with. And I was on the other side of that recently. I'm doing MCC practice right now, and the person that coached me, I was sharing something, and I was feeling so much tightness in my throat as I was sharing it, and the coach started coughing. And I was like, oh my God, I just made you cough. It was just wild. Like she was feeling in her body what I was experiencing. So we really do have this connection through our bodies. And if we need to, we can use those as guides. Sometimes something will come up, like all of a sudden an image will pop up or a thought will come up, and we can just take a moment and 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 then be aware of that and see what might be coming up, what sort of pattern is coming up with what the client is sharing that might have been alerting us to. And then Madhulika, what you said again about like having known that we all have experienced these emotions, I find that really helped me come back to empathy. So if a client is like really lost in something, they're really like, there's a thing called cognitive empathy where we understand their client's perspective on a cognitive level, but that only gets us so far. But if we can realize, I've been afraid too, I've been angry too, I've been sad too, we can all relate at this heart level with the clients and what they're going through. And then we use that as a basis of connection. And sometimes I'll even think like, how can I open to some of this as well, so to help take the burden off. So, and I'm not taking the burden off the client by saying anything to them, but when they're feeling heavy, just allowing the heaviness to be in me and imagining that I'm there with the client, helping them carry their heaviness, and I find that that really helps connect me with the client too. So I just wanted to pay attention to the chat here, separating my personal emotions from the client's experience. Yeah, I've had that happen. I've had a few things that have come up in a coaching session that have been very similar to something that I've experienced and that I've dealt with a lot of emotions around, and I've had to realize that it's separate, and I have to be there and recognize what the client's going through, because we all experience grief differently, we all experience anger differently, we experience love differently, but we do experience these things. And so recognizing that events will trigger different emotions for different people. So one last thing that I'll share, and then I'm hoping that we can do a little exercise together. There's a lot going on right now. I think that's part of the reason my nervous system is has been feeling a little jumpy lately, that we're just like surrounded by news. There's a lot happening in the world right now, and it can be very triggering. And I found myself one day looking at a news headline and the picture of a politician, I won't name any names, that the story was talking about something that upset me. It felt like there was a lot of injustice happening, and they zoomed in on this person's face, and I just caught myself looking at his face and looking in his eyes, and I felt so much sadness because I could just see what an unhappy person he was. And I was actually able to come to a space of love and actually hold love for someone whose actions I find very difficult to understand, but connect with the fact that we've all done things when we're unhappy, and really feel for him on that level. And so I thought that maybe we could end our session today with a little heart opening exercise together. We'll just take a couple of minutes. And I'd love you to join me if it resonates for you. So just taking a moment, I'm just going to take a moment to take in the faces on the screen and the hearts and souls that are behind them, and all the people in the chat that I can't see, but who've been so open and sharing, and just hold some gratitude for all of you. And then I'll allow my eyes to come off the screen, and just inviting all of you to do that as well. We get so focused on our computers, maybe just taking a look around the space that you're in, taking in some of the objects that are familiar, some of the nuances, colors, and textures of the room. And then coming back to center and dropping inwards by either closing the eyes or finding a soft gaze. And coming to the space of the breath, noticing the air as it travels in and out of the nostrils. And as noticing it as it travels into the body, the chest rising and falling to meet the breath and to release the breath. And noticing the rhythm of the heartbeat here. And staying in this heart-centered space, feeling the rise and the fall of the chest, feeling the heart beating, giving us life. And just taking a moment to reflect on the fact that all of us at one point have felt the experience of love. We've either loved or been loved. We've either felt the loss of love or mourned the loss of love. Or we feared losing love. And perhaps all of us have, or perhaps many of us have experienced all of these things. And yet, with every breath and every heartbeat, our body conspires us to keep us alive. Our body loves life. And so love is not something that we can give or take, hold on to or lose. It's simply there in every breath, in every heartbeat. In every moment. And this experience of love and all the emotions that we hold around it, whether that's joy, grief, fear, or happiness. This love and these feelings connect us all. I'm just feeling that with every breath, with every heartbeat, with every moment of life. And just taking whatever movement calls to you. Maybe that's placing the hands over the heart. Getting ready to open the eyes and join each other in the space that we share. Thank you, everybody, for everything that you've shared in this session and for opening your minds and your hearts and your wisdom to all of us here. We've got maybe a couple of minutes left. I know that there's a question here that we didn't get to. Does anyone feel like they can answer that in a minute or two?
the question you meant what to do if the client gets angry and wants to attack to feel better.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use a little bit of humor also here. So pardon if that doesn't resonate. So I'm just hoping that this session is not in person. So if it's a virtual session, then there are ways to deal with it. And then you can allow the client to feel anger and ask them to go punch something around them. So I'm just hoping that this doesn't have to happen in a in-person session. If it is an in-person session, I think I would even then give the moment of silence to the client and ask them to do what they feel can dissipate that anger a little bit to come back to the space.
I haven't had that necessarily happen in a session, but I've been in that situation in other situations, and I find that the best thing I can do is regulate my nervous system in that moment, because the mirroring works both ways. And so if I can regulate my nervous system, sometimes that'll help the other person calm down. But if we feel triggered and we reflect that to the person, then it can exacerbate it. Yeah. Thank you again, everyone. And if there is any other questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments when this will be on YouTube, and I'd be happy. I'll be taking a look and I'll address them then. Have a beautiful evening, day, wherever you are. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. And that was a profound exercise, Tracy. It really calms and brings in so much of love and compassion amongst each other.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for getting us here. It was lovely to share space with you and Priya. Tracy, you've been my trainer. So, a lot of things, we know so closely and resonate closely on many things. So it was a pleasure to be here this evening with everyone, engage with the questions. And Tracy, thanks. Just thanks.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everyone.